Hello, everyone. So, I wanted to talk about Wonka to give you some ideas in case you wanted to write about it for Essay 2. So, Wonka is not the first Willy Wonka piece of media. It all started back in 1964 with the original book by Roald Dahl, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That book was made into a movie in 1971, which is considered a classic. And then the book was made into a new movie in 2005. So, that's the brief history of Willy Wonka media. And Wonka, the movie we're talking about today, is a prequel to the 1971 movie. So, let's talk about it. I wanted to talk about Wonka's context because, as we've mentioned in the past, in order to understand a text, you need to have its context. So I picked some context I thought would be good for our purposes in analyzing Wonka. Citational context, I think, is very important. And by that, I mean how Wonka relates to other Willy Wonka-based media. In the original story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, in case you don't know, although I'm sure a lot of you probably do, a boy named Charlie, who is very poor, as we can see in this screenshot from the 2005 movie, he lives in this little shack with his 4 grandparents and his parents, and the 4 grandparents have to share a bed, and the other people in the house don't have a bed at all. They're very poor. And when Charlie wins the chance to go tour Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, he goes with four bad children. Augustus Gloop is greedy, Violet is also pretty greedy, and Veruca Salt is spoiled rotten and greedy, and Mike is just devoid of imagination. So Charlie is none of that. Charlie appreciates Willy Wonka's candy, and he also is very generous, and I wanted to illustrate that with a few clips from the 2005 movie.
Charlie, your mum and I thought maybe you want to open your birthday present tonight.
Here you are. Maybe I should wait till morning.
Michael, altogether we're 381 years old. We don't wait.
Charlie, you mustn't feel too disappointed. You know, if you don't get the...
Whatever happens, you'll still have the candy.
Ah, well, that's that.
We'll share it.
Oh, no, Charlie. Not your birthday present.
It's my candy bar, and I'll do what I want with it.
I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier. The elevator is by far the most efficient way to get around the factory.
There can't be this many floors.
How do you know, Mr. Smarty Pants? And this isn't just an ordinary up and down elevator, by the way. This elevator can go sideways, long ways, slant ways, and any other ways you can think of. You just press any button, and whoosh, you're off. Oh, look! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fudge Mountain. Oh! I'd rather not talk about this one. This is the Puppet Hospital and Burn Center. It's relatively new. The administration offices. Hello, Doris.
Why is everything here completely pointless? Candy doesn't have to have a point. That's why it's candy. It's stupid.
Alright, so if you're unfamiliar with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, at the end of the story in all three versions, the book, the 2005 movie, and the 70s movie, Charlie is given the chocolate factory as a reward for being generous, for being imaginative, for being a good kid, as opposed to the four bad children. So Charlie goes from rags to riches, and he's portrayed as deserving it because he is generous. And I think that, and imaginative, and I think that very much carries over into Wonka, which we are talking about now. Speaking of Wonka, I wanted to talk about its historical context also. It was released in 2023, and I thought it was relevant to the whole message that Wonka is going for, that it was released in a world that is not in the best economic shape. We're coming off COVID, still, some people would argue, and COVID caused a huge financial depression, economic crash, right? And we're still feeling the effects of it after the war in Ukraine began 2 years ago. We saw gas prices skyrocket. We're still dealing with inflation. We're not in the best economic shape. So I thought that was significant to mention because Wonka is very much about how greed is bad, how generosity is good, and how class inequality is a problem that we need to solve. So let's talk more about that. So Wonka has several symbols it uses to convey its message, and I wanted to talk about them. The first one is Willie's hat. So Willie has a hat full of dreams, as he sings about in the beginning of the movie, and something else about the hat. Of course, it's a symbol for his dreams and what he wants to accomplish, but it also makes him appear taller, and tallness sort of serves as a metaphor for wealth in the movie, I would say. And even though he runs through all his money, he still stands tall with his hat on his head, and he ends up wealthy in the end. And the reason he ends up wealthy and successful is because he beats back the greedy, and he also is generous. We see him giving a sovereign away to that mother and baby, even though it's his next to last one. So Willie is pretty generous. And he has a wealth of generosity, even though he doesn't have a wealth of money at the beginning. And his hat sort of shows how he still is wealthy, quote unquote. He still stands tall, even though he would appear not to. That leads me to Abigail the giraffe. She is quite tall, is she not? And like the people who are imprisoned in debt, basically at Scrubbit and Bleachers, she is imprisoned in the zoo. And she herself is quite generous, I would argue. She gives Willie her milk. So, and she's quite unique. I think the movie really values uniqueness. She is quite unique among animals for her height. And that is what makes her stand tall, both literally and figuratively. She has a wealth of uniqueness and a wealth of generosity, even though she is trapped like the people trapped at Scrubbit and Bleachers. So that makes it all the more satisfying when she finally breaks out and is free at the end of the movie. Yes, let's move on to Noodle's ring. With Noodle's ring, it's a symbol of her identity, obviously. She gets her name from it because Scrubbit thought it was an N, but it's really a Z. And Noodle's ring also is what gives her freedom in addition to identity, because when it's discovered who her parents or who her mother is, and who her parents are, she is able to leave Scrubbit and Bleachers, and of course Slugworth doesn't want that to happen because he's greedy and he wants all the money. He wants to be the sole heir to the Slugworth family fortune, and of course Noodle is his brother's daughter, so his niece, and he wants her out of the picture because he's greedy. So it's another anti-greed symbol. It also is a symbol of class mobility, how Noodle can get out of her current position if she knows where she comes from. But that's interesting, though, because the film also says it's not about who you are, but about who you are, right? For example, we'll just jump around the PowerPoint, which I think is fine to do. Bleacher, he acts like an aristocrat, but he really isn't, so it's all an illusion. And in terms of Noodle, she's not just an orphan. She is a person with a background and a history. But that isn't the most important thing, right? What's important is that she's freed, because she goes to live with her mom at the library. And it's a pretty big library, to be sure. It's a really grand building. But at the end of the day, she doesn't inherit the Slugworth fortune, or at least we don't see that, ever. Because that's not what's important. She never gets that lifetime supply of chocolate that Willie promises her, because she really doesn't want it or need it, because all she wanted was her mom, and to know who she is. And she learns both of those things, and she doesn't need wealth or money, etc. What she needs is freedom. So, that is her ring. And then there is Willie's mother's chocolate bar. So Willie's mom made a chocolate bar for him, and it contains the secret of chocolate. And her secret is, it's the people you share it with. The chocolate is not what matters. So, yeah. She is advocating generosity on the little golden ticket, we might even say. She thinks that you should share chocolate with the world. And that is what it's all about. It's not about profit. It's about helping people out with the chocolate, because that's what Wonka's chocolate does. It makes you feel 10 feet tall, right? This guy got married because of Wonka's chocolate. So, yes, it is another symbol, the chocolate bar is, of how greed is bad, but generosity is good, and helping people out is what is important. So we all can succeed, not just one person. Everyone should be able to succeed, so don't be greedy. There we go. I wanted to talk about the theme of corporations and institutions versus individuals. So, the film is against corporations and institutions, it seems, because it portrays them all as corrupt. The obvious first example is Scrubbed and Bleacher. They are not exactly a corporation, but they're certainly a business, and a rather shady business, I might add. And they, of course, trap people in debt because they're greedy, etc. The Chocolate Cartel is extremely greedy. They are very sketchy, guys, because they claim to be rivals at the very beginning of the movie when they first meet Willie. But in reality, they're all working together to try to destroy Willie because they're greedy and they want all the profits for themselves. The police are another institution portrayed as corrupt and greedy because the police chief is in cahoots with the Chocolate Cartel, and he also is obsessed with chocolate. He is an Augustus Gloop, if I ever saw one. Very, very greedy is the police chief. So all those institutions are portrayed negatively, and another interesting institution that is portrayed negatively is the church, which I thought was extremely interesting, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it, honestly, but maybe y'all will get some ideas. One thing I will say is the Oompa Loompa Guard, I would count them as another institution that is corrupt, because they also trap Lofty into debt, not unlike Scrubbin' and Bleacher, for example. And they're wearing a very weird, well, not weird, I guess, but a very specific outfit that seems to be based on the Swiss Guard. So if you don't know, and that's why I have these two pictures here, the Swiss Guard are basically the bodyguards for the Pope. So that is really something. I'm not sure why they made that artistic choice, unless it's as simple as trying to link the Oompa Loompas to the church in a symbolic sense, not a literal sense, that they're both greedy institutions. So yes, and of course the church is greedy. We saw Mr. Bean, priest, I think his name is Father Julius, the corrupt cleric. He doesn't give any chocolate to the poor and eats it all for himself, and he also is in cahoots with the cartel. He provides their little headquarters underground. So that just speaks to the fact that even the institutions that are supposed to be generous, like a church, when you think of generosity, you think of church a lot of the time, in our culture at least, right? But nope, even the church is greedy. So there is so much greed in the world, the movie says, and the way to combat that is to not be greedy and to be an entrepreneur, an individual, right? Because it seems these collective groups all succumb to greed. So be an entrepreneur. That is what you should do. Entrepreneurship is good. Being an individual innovator is seen as good in the movie. And the film really places a lot of importance on imagination. It carries over a song from the 70s movie, Pure Imagination, and uses it for rhetorical effect, I would argue. The film places a lot of importance on imagination and the innovation that results from it. Not just in terms of, oh, Willy Wonka's candy is so creative and fun, but Willy also, in the movie, he creates this laundry machine to get himself out of a tight spot, and that helps him to open his shop, right? And get out of scrubbing and bleachers. So innovation in general is seen as a good thing. Imagination is seen as important in the movie for solving problems. And that contrasts with the chocolate cartel, who say that chocolate should be ordinary and plain and not weird, etc. Also, you might want to consider the fact that Lofty, the Oompa Loompa, uses ingenuity to get himself out of problems. Well, not necessarily problems, but help himself out, even though he's quite short. Shorter than your average Oompa Loompa. He uses a sort of grappling hook device to get up to Willy's window at Scrubbin' and Bleachers. He also has that set of wings that he uses to fly, even though he's not very tall, so he can reach that lever to drain the giant vault of chocolate and save Willy and Noodle. So innovation is how you stand tall, right? As we were talking about earlier, height as a metaphor for wealth. It's how you get out of problems. It is how you achieve your goals, etc. So imagination is important. But, movie says, imagination is not just important. Education is important, and it's portrayed as paramount to class mobility. The whole reason that Willy ends up in Scrubbin' and Bleachers to begin with is because he can't read the fine print. So, not being educated gets you into trouble. Willy also finds Noodle's mother through learning how to read. He reads Dorothy Smith's name in the ledger from the Chocolate Cartel. And he also when he learns to read, he can read his mom's secret about how chocolate needs to be shared. You need to help people once you make it so other people can make it as well. So yes, reading is very important, the film says, clearly. And generosity is also important. So the film says that those who are wealthy in imagination and generosity, like Willy Wonka, are the ones who deserve and eventually will get financial wealth if they use their imagination and their generosity. The greedy are not supposed to have financial wealth, or shouldn't, the film says, because they don't deserve it, because they don't think of others, they are not generous. Yes, Willy isn't greedy, although there is one scene where he steals those 4 cocoa beans, which sort of throws a wrench into that whole idea that Willy stands in contrast to Scrubbin' and Bleacher, the cartel, the police chief, the cleric, etc. He was kind of greedy in that scene, wasn't he? So I think that just goes to show that, because he took all of them, so that just goes to show that the world isn't necessarily black and white, and people can have moments of weakness or give in to temptation, because no one is perfect. But what sets Willy apart is that he doesn't stay greedy, and he does pay off Lofty in the end when he learns that he has gotten Lofty into some trouble for stealing those cocoa beans. Something else I wanted to talk about that I would say the movie argues is that you don't have to be defined by your station in life, your job, your title, or even your physical characteristics, your traits. It's not about who you are, but who you are, in other words. We already mentioned that Bleacher, despite thinking otherwise, is not an aristocrat. He is just some greedy, smelly, evil man who is not an important person. So there's that. Lofty is short, but that doesn't mean he can't make it through his inventions like we talked about before. And there's also people like the people who are trapped at Scrubbin' and Bleachers, Abacus, Lottie, Chucklesworth, and Piper. These are all menial jobs they have. An accountant, I would say, pretty, not terribly impressive, pretty ordinary, I should say. Lottie worked the phones, Chuckleworth was a comedian, and Piper was a plumber. But that doesn't mean they can't do great things. They put their skills to noble use to help Willie out. So you aren't stuck where you are, the film says. If you are a good, generous, imaginative person, you can be whatever you want to be, and you shouldn't be unable to move up in life, get out of a certain class. So yes, there we go. Oompa loompa doompity dee, let's end class inequality. So, class inequality is the problem the film portrays, and it uses a loose sort of problem-solution structure like we talked about with the Stephen King essay. The problem is clearly class inequality, but what is the solution? And the solution, I think, is obvious here. When you use imagination and education, the needy can fight the greedy, and with their generosity give everyone the chance to feel 10 feet tall. So you should be like Willy Wonka. Even though you're needy, you should still be generous, and you should use your imagination and use education to not only increase your own wealth, but increase the wealth of others, to give other people the chance to do what you do. Feel 10 feet tall. And they even say that in that song. He gives this man chocolate and his life improves. So generosity is the solution, and with your generosity you can help other people make it in the world. Alright, final thoughts. We moved through that pretty efficiently. So, the movie is not anti-wealth, I would say. I don't think this is like a socialist movie, necessarily. Although, if you see that, feel free to argue it. But, Willy Wonka is very wealthy, and he's portrayed as the good guy. And he becomes wealthy at the end of this movie. And the chocolate cartel are wealthy and they're the bad guys, obviously, but Scrubbin' and Bleacher don't seem to be very rich. They seem quite poor, but they're greedy, and that's what makes them bad. So I don't think wealth is a bad thing in this movie, I would say. I would also say the movie is pro-creativity. It definitely wants people to use their imagination to make the world a better place and help people out. And that's how class inequality will be solved, the film says. And I also think the film is quite relevant in that, like I alluded to at the beginning, we are not in the best financial shape here in America, at least. And we are dealing with inflation, grocery prices, student loans. We have to start paying them back now, and it's like everywhere you look, people want money from you. So I think this movie is definitely relevant in that it is speaking against greedy corporations out there who might be contributing to inflation, perhaps, and how that's putting down us little people who are just trying to put our ideas and our skills out there. And the last thing I want to say is there is some irony in all of this, in the fact that this movie is a reboot, right? It's a reboot of a classic movie that everyone loves for the most part. And that just seems sort of like a cash grab. So you might be asking yourselves, are the creators of this movie being greedy? Perhaps, but I don't think that necessarily undermines their message. And just as a fast fun fact, going along with that, the 1970s movie was made to sell candy. That is something a lot of people aren't aware of. It was quite literally made for greediness, you know. So that's kind of funny. But I think the film's message is not undermined by that. And I think the film also, with it saying that creativity is important, I think that really resonates today because we are in potential danger of a creativity crisis with AI that is doing all the imagining for us, perhaps to our detriment. And I think there's no better way to illustrate that than the fact that there was recently in Glasgow, Scotland, a Willy Wonka event that was put on that was totally AI generated. The scripts were AI generated for the poor actors. The advertising was obviously AI generated, and they also used AI images to trick people into thinking it was going to be a fun time, and they charged $40 in American money for people to go to this horrible, lackluster, not even lackluster, but awful, falsely advertised little event in this empty warehouse. So, the greedy beat the needy in that case, but now perhaps the needy can beat back. So, shun AI, embrace pure imagination, be generous, and you too can beat the greedy. Alright, I think that's what I'll say for Wonka. And thank you for listening. Hopefully this got the juices flowing. If you want to write about this movie and what its message is, and I will see y'all next time. Thank you guys.